Wednesday, 11th of April, 1996. Dunblane, Scotland. Heavy plant machinery begins the demolition of a school gymnasium building. Whilst you may think there is nothing particularly strange about that, there is an awful reason behind it. Only the previous month, inside that very same school gym, one of the most horrific and shameful crimes in British history took place, which had left 17 murdered and a further 15 injured, most of whom were children. There was one more dead body amongst them, that of the perverted and despicable perpetrator, who had chosen the coward's way out, rather than face the consequences of his crimes. Today, Descent into Darkness examines the events that led to Britain's deadliest mass shooting, the Dunblane Massacre. Making a murderer. Thomas Watt Hamilton was born on the 10th of May 1952 in Glasgow, Scotland. His mother, Agnes, who worked as a hotel chambermaid, had divorced Thomas's father by the time he was born. She felt incapable of taking care of her baby properly, and so little Thomas grew up with his mother's step-parents, who raised him as their own, legally finalising the adoption when Thomas was 2 years old. Although for many years he was led to believe that his biological mother was in fact his sister, he did not come to learn the truth until he was 22. It can never be quantified just how much this revelation messed up Thomas's mind, but it is not outside of the realms of possibility to speculate that it could have left him with a deep distrust of others and a seething frustration bordering on anger at the hand that life had dealt him. This, of course, in no way attempts to absolve what would come later, but can at least help to explain its genesis. Through his formative years, Hamilton seemed to exhibit a deep desire for belonging, a proxy for the normal family that he never had, perhaps. He joined several clubs, including the Boys' Brigade, a local rifle club, and he became an assistant Boy Scout troop leader. When he was age 20, a glimpse of Hamilton's true nature showed during his time with the Boy Scouts. By 1973, he was the leader of a scout troop in Stirlingshire. He attempted to share his love of firearms with the children, which, unless you're going for your Master-at-Arms badge, is a big no-no. During one incident in 1974, he organised a trip away with the Scouts. However, he deliberately lied to the parents by telling them that he had booked a hostel for them to stay in, where in fact he and the 8 boys slept in Hamilton's freezing cold van overnight. Very quickly, suspicion fell on him that perhaps he was a little too keen to be around children, if you know what I mean. And it would make sense if he was showing the kids how to properly hold a rifle, which would require getting very close into their personal space, and there were rumours that his hands wandered to places that they ought not. Several complaints came in, which left those in charge with little choice but to sack him in 1974, who cited that his moral intentions towards young boys were not innocent, and it is unsuitable for you to be around young men. This greatly angered Hamilton, and he left under a seething cloud of ignominy. Not one to give up, though, he repeatedly asked to be allowed to return, but he was refused, prompting him to begin a letter-writing campaign to anyone who would listen, protesting his treatment, claiming, of all things, persecution. But he did not get what he wanted, and so was left a bit like a child having a tantrum. Hamilton developed a keen interest in firearms and shooting, starting his own collection of guns, although, much like his interest in boys, his obsession with firearms also went a little too far. He would talk to them as he cleaned and inspected them, seeing them as a pathway to a sense of power that he could never hope to achieve by any other means. He decided that if he couldn't rejoin the Boy Scouts, then he would create his own version. He started up several boys' clubs that specialised in shooting, sports and gymnastics. However, his strange manner and inappropriate behaviour quickly led to self-alienation, and the clubs were forced to close. He had also now garnered the widespread distrust of the local community, who nicknamed him Mr. Creepy, which, knowing Glaswegian humour, is very mild of an insult for them. Although, given that there are photos of him supervising a group of boys who, for reasons unknown, are only wearing shorts and not wearing vest tops, you must wonder what was happening when the camera wasn't pointed at him. It is said that he would organise summer camping activities and have the boys walk around with little to no clothes on, and even have them rub sun lotion on him. He would also take photos of the boys with no shirts on and happily displayed them all around his home. He was never charged with any specific offences involving his behaviour towards children, but at least 10 separate complaints were received by the police, who would simply have his club closed. But Hamilton circumvented this by approaching a different local authority and asking them to set up there instead. In this way, he would run at least 20 separate boys' clubs between 1981 and 1996. In the early 1990s, he is said to have pulled up in his van outside the home of a woman who had complained about him to the police and threatened her with a pistol. Due to the, as he saw, unfair treatment that he received, Hamilton became an obsessive, paranoid misfit, brimming with resentment towards a community that had seen right through the facade and had rejected him. He appeared to have held a particular contempt for Dunblane Primary School, which he expressed in one of his many letters, this one being written to a member of the local educational authority in January of 1996, 3 months before the attack. He wrote, "At Dunblane Primary School, where teachers have contaminated all the older boys with this poison, even former cleaners and dinner ladies have been told by teachers at the school that I am a pervert. There have been reports at many schools of our boys being rounded up by staff and even warnings given to entire schools by head teachers during assembly." One of these many letters even reached the Queen. An excerpt of this particular letter, written only 6 days before the attack, shows his perpetual and deluded victim complex. "I have been involved in the organisation of boys' sports clubs for over 20 years, and the rumours circulated by officials of the Scout Association have now reached epidemic proportions across the central region. As well as my personal distress and loss of public standing, the situation has resulted in the loss of my business and ability to make a living. Indeed, I cannot even walk the streets for fear of embarrassing ridicule. All of this and more has been caused by the male administration of the Scout Association and their denial of natural justice and a duty of care. To some Scout officials, it was simply a ruse to oust a rival group. I turn to you as a last resort, and I am appealing for some sort of intervention in the hope that I may be able to regain some of my self-esteem in society. I am your obedient servant, Thomas W. Hamilton." The fateful day. On the morning of Wednesday the 13th of March 1996, at 08:15, Hamilton was seen by one of his neighbours outside his home on Kent Road in Stirling. He was scraping the ice off of the window of his van. This would be the last known sighting of him before his grisly spree. A little after 09:30, Hamilton pulled into the car park of the Dunblane Primary School in his van. His first task was to climb the telegraph pole outside the building and cut the phone wires to stop the police being called, which would give him more time. He then entered the main building and made his way toward the gymnasium. He was armed with 4 guns, 2 Browning high-power semi-automatic pistols and 2 Smith & Wesson Model 19s, along with 743 rounds of ammunition. When he reached the gym, he found a class of 28 Year 1 pupils being taught by 45-year-old teacher Gwen Mayer, along with 3 other adult members of staff. Immediately, he raised one of the Browning high-power pistols and opened fire at Gwen, killing her instantly. Deafening screams and crying erupted all around the building. He then turned his aim to the other teaching staff who were present. PE teacher Eileen Harold sustained gunshot wounds to her arm and chest as she attempted to shield herself. She managed to make her way to a large storage cupboard with her colleague Mary Blake and 4 injured children, where they all took shelter and the door barricaded. However, a large group of children were cornered by Hamilton, who fired 16 shots at them. 15 children were killed instantly. Another child was injured when he happened to be walking along the exterior of the gym just as the shooting had begun. He looked through the window to see what all the noise was about. Hamilton saw him and fired a shot. The child was able to run away, but suffered small lacerations from the broken glass. Hamilton then stepped outside of the gym building and began discharging his weapons indiscriminately toward the school library, hitting and injuring staff member Grace Tweddle, and at a nearby prefabricated building being used as an extra classroom. The teacher of that class, Catherine Gordon, saw what was going on and immediately ordered her pupils to get down on the floor beneath their tables. As 9 shots hit the temporary building, one of the projectiles passed through the back of one of the chairs where a child had been sitting only seconds before. Hamilton then re-entered the gym, whereupon he dropped his empty and smoking pistols and drew one of his revolvers. He put the barrel in his mouth and finally ended his pathetic existence. The entire attack had lasted no more than 5 minutes. In all, Hamilton had fired 106 shots, with the last one being for himself, taking the coward's way out and ensuring that he would never have to answer for his crimes that numbered 16 dead and a further 15 wounded, most of them all being children between ages 5 and 6. One more child would later die of their injuries whilst en route to hospital. Aftermath. Due to the phone lines being cut and the confusion and suddenness of the attack, the authorities were not reached until around 09:41, 6 minutes after the event had ended. The headmaster of the school, Ronald Taylor, had heard some loud bangs but assumed it must have been some building work going on that he was not aware of. He was then told by the assistant head, Agnes Olson, that they thought there was a gunman in the school, as she had heard screams and she had seen what looked like spent cartridge cases on the ground. Taylor made the call to the police and then took off toward the gym. He entered the building and saw the horrific and bloody sight. The colour drained from his face and a chill ran down his spine. He rushed back to the office and yelled for an ambulance to be called. The first ambulance arrived on the scene at 09:57 and was quickly followed by more, along with second-line responders who all got to work in stabilising the injured. 2 children at the school on that fateful day, though thankfully not involved in the event itself, were future tennis stars Andy Murray and his elder brother Jamie. When the news broke of this event, a veil of stunned belief descended upon Britain. Who could have been so evil to have done such a thing to innocent children? Many voices called for a tightening of the UK's gun laws, which were already prohibitive, to ban the private ownership of concealable handguns. The school quickly became inundated with flowers, gifts, and messages of love and sympathy. A sea of floral tributes filled the entrance lobby, a moment in which faith in wider humanity was briefly restored. A vigil and prayer service was held at Dunblane Cathedral 2 days after the massacre, which was followed by a visit from Queen Elizabeth II and her daughter Princess Anne on the 17th, which was Mother's Day. An official memorial service was organised 7 months later by the victims' families and held at Dunblane Cathedral. The service was attended by around 600 people. The then Prince Charles was one of the attendees. The next month it was decided to raise the school gymnasium, as it held far too many painful memories. It has since been replaced with a memorial garden. 3 local churches commissioned special stained glass windows to honour the victims also. In the summer of the following year, a special memorial centrepiece was planted on a roundabout in Dunblane. It featured 2 specially bred strains of rose developed by Cockers of Aberdeen. The first was called Gwen Mayer, after the slain teacher of the class, and the second was dubbed Innocence. Legacy. The Dunblane Massacre holds a particular place in the collective public imagination. I personally remember my mum telling me about it. It was a truly shocking event. Of course, sadly, the murder of a child is not an unknown phenomenon, but for so many to be callously killed all at once in this kind of situation was practically unprecedented in the UK. The government acted very quickly upon the publication of the Cullen Report to ban the ownership of handguns in England, Wales and Scotland. Although you can actually still own them under a certain degree of restrictions, which makes the law rather confusing and completely broken, the law does not apply to Northern Ireland. Obviously, the relatively small firearms community in the UK were not happy in being forced to surrender their handguns. As an avid firearms enthusiast, I would have been amongst one of those aggrieved had I been old enough at the time. But when one weighs that against pictures of dead children, it is nigh on impossible to come up with a convincing counter-argument. In a so painfully obvious attempt at arse-covering, the Boy Scout Association, when asked about why Hamilton had been removed as a leader, instead of the truth, they simply cited incompetence. Several aspects of the Cullen Report are subject to a closure order, meaning that they cannot be published for 100 years. The reason for this was given as to protect the families of the victims from further distress. However, some speculate that it was also done to protect other individuals of high public profile, but until the year 2096, we shall never know. Thankfully, these days, there are a lot more measures in place to ensure the safeguarding of children and vulnerable people that make a repeat of the patterns of behaviour exhibited by Thomas Hamilton a highly unlikely recurrence. Thomas Hamilton was a pathetic loner, a sick and disgusting paedophile who used his various positions of trust to take advantage of children for his own perverted urges. He was a sad, cretinous failure of a creature who sought to justify his sorry existence by exerting control over the only people he could, children. He saw any attempt by normal people to protect said children as a personal attack, a persecution, or a witch hunt. Instead of taking the proper steps to improve his lot with his continual failure in life, he decided to attempt to go down the road of infamy by doing what he did. As a consequence, 17 would lose their lives, 16 of them being children. Those who remained were left with irreparable mental scars that the rest of us could never comprehend. I shall close out this video with the names of the victims and a sincere hope that their souls are at peace. Abigail McClellan, aged 5. Victoria Clydesdale, aged 5. Sophie North, 5. Ross Irvine, 5. Mari McBeath, 5. Melissa Curry, 5. Megan Turner, 5. Kevin Hassel, 5. John Petrie, 5. Joanna Ross, 5. Hannah Scott, 5. Emma Crozier, 5. Emily Morton, 5. David Kerr, 5. Charlotte Dunn, 5. Brett McKinnon, 6. And Gwen Mayer, aged 45. Thank you for watching this video. I do hope you found it informative and interesting. If you did, please smash the old like button and consider subscribing and dinging the bell icon to get notified of whenever I put out new videos. Check out my back catalogue to find even more events from the darker side of history. What do you think of Thomas Hamilton? Let me know in the comments. And once again, my birthday has rolled around on the 15th. 37 now. Scary. If you wish to do so, you can support DID on Patreon, link in the description, or via the Super Thanks button if you wish to give a one-off donation. A huge thank you to my current patrons, whose support is vital in keeping things ticking over here in my little dark castle. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves, and I shall see you on our next descent into darkness.